What's going on, everybody? Today's a sad day. Today's a really bad day for humanity and the rest of the world. And I'm sorry to have to tell you this, and I'm probably going to be the only one to tell you this. But even though we were all celebrating the victory that the World Pandemic Health Treaty had failed at the 77th World Health Assembly, the reality is that that was just a bait and switch to make us feel okay. And behind the scenes, every country around the world has secretly adopted all new amendments to the international health regulations that apply to every single country. What this means is the same exact things that were in the World Health Organization Pandemic Treaty are now part of the international health regulations for each individual country. This means that your government can impose the exact same measures as the WHO Pandemic Treaty without having to go to the WHO. That means they gave each individual country their own power to implement these amendments. And I'm going to send you a list of the amendments that they've implemented, and it's just as bad as you think. If you're going to want to leave your country, you're going to have to be mandatorily vaccinated. They even say they can force gene therapy on you and all types of other scary shit. It's just as bad as the WHO Pandemic Treaty, only now they don't have to go to the World Health Organization to implement it. Each country now has the power to do this to you. So this is just another big bait and switch and another stab in the back. And even more reason why now, if you're going to want to freely travel around the world, you're going to need to get passports and residencies in different places, or you're going to have to be stuck where you are or have to get fake papers, etc. This is a new world, and it's not a good world. And when we thought we won, we really lost this battle, guys.
There is no formal adoption of neither of the treaties. And regarding the new pandemic treaty, we already knew at the beginning of this week that this was going to postpone. Regarding the amendments to the international health regulations, there were intense negotiations going on late into this night under the tremendous pressure of the representatives of the United States to come to a conclusion. What can we say about what is on the table? Where do we have the highest concern? And why do we have to raise our voice against these two legal instruments? In particular, the amendments to the IHR as we have them on the table as drafts right now. Number one, you have all heard that there is a binding rule in the international health regulations themselves, Article 55, paragraph 2, that clearly states that the final wording of any amendment to the international health regulations must be submitted to the member states at least 4 months in advance. The World Health Organization claims to have done so by submitting to the world and publishing in November 2022 a compilation of 300 different proposals, almost not consolidated, in fact, with many different options for many different provisions in the same time. And what we have seen from the latest drafts, they brought new aspects into the game that nobody knew before, like what we have seen in Annex 1. And it is a matter of principle that all those parties that are involved and affected by the new rules are given their voice and their consent before the delegates can give their vote in favor of an agreement. Therefore, we certainly must never put aside this 4 months rule. Then we have to clearly state that this instrument, this legal instrument of a regulation, was never meant to comprise so far-reaching new rules that affect member states, but also citizens. And here I give you just a brief enumeration of the most relevant far-reaching rules that we see on the table in the international health regulations in combination with the pandemic treaty. Number one, Annex 1 to the international health regulations under the title of core capacity provides far-reaching duties, imposes far-reaching duties onto the member states and their regions and their municipalities also to establish a system of permanent surveillance with the principle or the method that is then governed by the treaty of genomic sequencing. Here, this is one aspect where we see far-reaching duties coming up to the states and to their local regions and communities. Number two, we have an arbitrarian widening of a pretext for a fake that other of my colleagues will go into more detail, but we will see that it is arbitrarian how the WHO wants to allow itself to base a public health emergency of international concern on no standardized procedures based on a constant surveillance. We will have Reggie Middleton, my colleague Beate Bana, and Professor Trito speak about this principle of constant surveillance, and Professor Trito about the unlawful method of genomic sequencing. And number three, this concept of infodemics, although the term was
that. So welcome to Commoner Law Group's special presentation of the World Health Organization's deceitful trickery and the continued battle for our own sovereignty, individual and collective here as Americans. We have with us the top freedom-loving journalist, James Roguski, who has been consistent and reliable. This is not his first time with us. You can go to our YouTube channel and find at the Commoner Law Group's channel on YouTube are several interviews with James from the past. And he knows that our group is particularly interested in the law. So he not only gives us the facts, the news, so to speak, but he's very helpful in helping us learn about the law and how this whole World Health Organization works legally, how does it work constitutionally, and how can we make a difference as the people? Where are our levers, so to speak, of power? A lot of you maybe spent time in the last month or so sending emails to your senators or congresspeople telling them that you do not want the United States to be part of the pandemic treaty that was being worked on recently by the bureaucrats in Geneva. And, so there's some straight up old-fashioned activism that can be relevant to our conversation. But in the end, by what authority do these folks find themselves able to produce the most overreaching, most draconian measures? And now we will learn how they also use some deceit and trickery. I don't know if you're like me, but over the last month or so, there's been some different ideas, different newscasts, different perspectives on what's actually going on in Geneva. And then as the 77th Assembly ended, and Tedros, the head of the WHO, was on video crying about how he and they were not successful in passing the pandemic treaty. But at the same time, the International Health Regulations, which is the body of regulations that the World Health Organization uses to regulate its member countries, was amended in a big way. So what's really the truth? And I'm happy to tell you that you're going to get the flat truth, the story about what really actually happens, what it means to us. And again, as much as you can, James, fill in for people the lawful aspects. Again, how is this even allowed constitutionally? What about the states of the union? Maybe I think it's Louisiana who passed, state legislature passed a law in their state saying they're not going to comply with any treaty, which would be a departure from a federal agreement. So some of the legal aspects would be very, very interesting, especially as we move forward. Oh, God, I would pray for some kind of silver bullet if we had such a thing. But short of that, what is it that we Americans need to know about this constant, incremental, never-ending encroachment into our rights by an organization that's using health, obviously, as a psychological operation, as a spear point to try to take over so much of our sovereignty under the guise of health. So, welcome, James. Thank you so much for taking time with us. How are you?
I am doing great.
Well, I think I'd like actually to have maybe just a top line summary of, what we honestly need to know, apart from the confusing messages we might have gotten from different parties. Even, Children's Health Defense says one thing. Obviously, the World Health Organization has their spin on things. So we just want the straight truth.
If you could imagine being in school and you come into a new classroom, there's a blackboard on the front of the room, and the class before was some super high level mathematics, algebra, trigonometry, all kinds of squiggly things on the blackboard. Take the eraser and just erase everything you think you know about what's going on with the WHO, and then go get a bucket of water and a rag and really clean it all off, get it all gone. Okay. A good portion of what you said, a good portion of what Philip Cruz said, a good portion of what Chris Sky said, it's all wrong. Now, there's little tiny tidbits in there, but this is how propaganda works. This is how you've heard, I'm sure, of mis, dis, and mal information. I'm adding a fourth, and that's old information. And there's really a fifth, which is like cross, pollinated information, where information here gets attributed there and so forth and so on. And even though I just said what I said, I'm going to say it again. Everything you think you know, probably wrong. So just erase it all. We'll start from scratch and talk about what the heck just happened. Okay? This has never been an attack on sovereignty. This has never been the WHO trying to put forth a coup and take over your healthcare, tell your doctor what to do, command mandates, lockdowns, whatever. There's been an awful lot of misinformation out on the internet. If you go all the way back, and I'm going to use a word that I've been using it a lot, and I really don't like using it, but it gets the point across. Okay. If you could go back to December 2021, kind of imagine the time frame, and imagine, I know it's hard, but imagine that you, everybody here, were a normie. Okay. I don't like calling people that, but if you could imagine that you were just drinking the Kool-Aid and you were like, whatever the government told you to do, that's what you would do. And you would be of the mindset that, well, the way to get out of this pandemic is everybody's got to get a bunch of jabs. Okay. Well, at the end of 2021, that had been going on for almost a year. And what had happened was it didn't roll out the way it was talked about. It was supposedly talked about, well, we have to first protect the vulnerable, meaning emergency personnel, doctors, nurses, right? Around the world, they were like the most at risk. If you believe all this, if you're a normie and you believe the normal story, supposed to do all the emergency personnel, doctors, so forth. And then, maybe elderly in, care facilities and, older people and then younger people and so forth and so on. But that's not what happened. And I'll use a good example. Canada bought 400 million jabs for 40 million people. And the United States pretty much cornered the market on remdesivir. People sometimes call that remdesivir. Okay. And so the nations that are relatively low income looked at that situation. Now you got to remember, you're a normie, right? And they said, hey, that's not fair. You're keeping all this wonderful, good, high technology jabs. We're not getting our share. And so they called for a special session of the World Health Assembly. And they essentially said, we want the WHO. Now, this is the nations in the World Health Assembly. They are the governing body of the World Health Organization bureaucracy. Think what it would be like if the Senate was in charge of the government and that the Senate set policy and the government had to follow it. They were subservient to the Senate. right? Well, that's not our system, but that's the WHO. So they said to the WHO, we want the Secretariat and the WHO to facilitate these negotiations, and we want and this comes from the WHO Constitution, we want a convention agreement or in other international instrument. Now that's right out of Articles 18, 19, 20, 19, 20, 21, and 22. And they can do it as a convention or an agreement, or they can do it as the regulations. And then in July of 2022, I believe it was, they said, well, we want to definitely do a convention agreement, but we're also going to do some of the amendments. So it forked, and it ended up being two separate negotiations. They kept saying, and you've probably heard this term, that they want equity. They want equity. They want equitable distribution, equitable access to pandemic-related products. I'm going to ask a rhetorical question. I won't hold anybody to not knowing the answer, because 2 years ago, I had to look it up too, right? So there's probably no reason that you should know, but if you do, what is the definition of a global public good? Now, that's not the common good. I had people immediately go, oh, the common. No, it's not the common good. The global public good. What that is, I'll give you the definition, and it'll probably be a little bit confusing, but then I'll give you a couple of examples and it'll all make sense. In November, well, actually, I'll come back to that in a minute. A global public good is something that has infinite supply. I could consume a global public good till my heart's content, fill up on it, get everything I might want, and that would not infringe upon each and every one of you here going and doing the same thing. Okay, and you might be scratching your head, what the heck, how could that be? Everybody on earth could get as much as they want, abundant supply. Well, a couple of examples. Sunshine. If you want to go outside and sunbathe, get some vitamin D going, whatever. Unless you're goofing around on the beach and you're standing in front of your friend, trying to keep them in the shade so they get a funny tan, anybody can go outside and soak up the sun as much as they want. And that doesn't mean that somebody on the other side of the planet is going to get shortchanged. Same thing with breathing. You can hyperventilate all you want, but I can still get all the air that I need, no problem. Okay. This video is a global public good. People could download it 1 million times. 8 billion people, it would be great if 8 billion people watch this video. Okay. You make a PDF and you make it available, people download it. Just because I downloaded it 10 times doesn't mean that 10 people on the other side of the country are going to get shortchanged. In November of 2021, before the run-up to these negotiations, Tedros and many other people at the WHO said something that when this sinks in, it should put horror into what you're thinking about. They said that they want pandemic related products to be a global public good. So masks and diagnostic tests like the PCR, which is fraudulent, drugs like remdesivir, midazolam, so forth, and all of the many jabs. They wanted them to flow like water from an artesian well and just, oh, you want a jab? How many would you like? We got all the jabs you want. You want some drugs? You want some remdesivir? You want to take a test? You want to wear a mask? Everybody gets as much as they possibly could ever want. That is the goal of these negotiations. Now, what happened was the initial round of amendments that the nations made hundreds and hundreds of suggestions as to what they thought should be changed. Bangladesh and the African group of 47 nations submitted very similar proposed amendments to create a new Article 13A. And in general, what they said was, since their concern was, all the rich nations are hogging all the stuff and we're not getting what we need, they wanted to set up Tedros Ghebreyesus, or whoever the Director General was, as being in charge of the means of production and distribution. And so he would be able to set up an allocation mechanism to deliver, Canada makes a bunch of lipid nanoparticles, and the wrapping that all the mRNA is supposedly encased in. So he could say, hey, you need to send it to this country because they need that to do what they're doing, or any drug or jab or mask or whatever. And for 4 months, October, November, December of 2022, and then into January of 23, in February, their expert review committee that looked at what the nations told them said, yeah, no, that's a little bit too Marxist, communist, totalitarian, dictatorial control all in one person. The WHO doesn't have the authority to make that kind of thing happen. You got to go back to the drawing board and come up with a better idea. And son of a gun, they came up with a better idea. And so what is in this pile of amendments is, number one, the relevant health products. They had been calling them pandemic related products. They changed it to relevant health products. It includes medicines, pharmaceutical drugs, vaccines, diagnostics, and then they added right at the last minute, cell and gene-based therapies and other health technologies. Now that could be CRISPR, gene editing, could be whatever, right? So that's the definition of relevant health products. In Article 13, paragraph 8C on page 12, it says the Director General shall support nations in scaling up and geographically diversifying the production of relevant health products. You've heard the saying, give somebody a fish they eat for a day, teach them how to fish, they can feed themselves forever. Well, this is give somebody some jabs or give them the ability to manufacture all the jabs they want, and they'll have an unlimited supply. Okay. So in order to finance that, they put forth Article 44 BIS. BIS just means they wedged it in between 44 and 45, and they didn't want to renumber everything that came after it because that'd be confusing. It says a coordinating financial mechanism, the mechanism, is hereby established. And essentially what they want to do, now I don't know if people have ever heard Catherine Austin Fitts talk about Mr. Global, right? All of the financial, hey, there's a friend, and well, you're all friends, but there's a special one that I know personally. So they want to be able to get financing from any means possible, funnel it through this mechanism, and have it go out to build out the pharmaceutical industry around the world, primarily in developing nations, because they missed a bunch of people the first time around because it was difficult to manufacture something that had to be in cold storage and go halfway around the planet, into outback or the, savannah or the desert or wherever. And so they missed out on, I don't know, 2 billion people maybe who they couldn't get to. Okay. Now, one of the things that's in here, which is really subtle, is that the mechanism, meaning the financing, shall leverage voluntary monetary contributions for organizations and other entities supporting the nations. Now, for me, that brings many, many things to mind because I've been watching all these negotiations, and there's 400 relevant stakeholders that are officially recognized by the WHO. NGOs, non-state actors, civil society organizations, foundations, you name it, charities, whatever you want to call them. And they've been allowed to participate in these meetings, and all of them want this agreement, or they wanted this agreement to happen because it's a gravy train. And that line right there, real subtle, that would leverage voluntary monetary contributions for organizations and other entities. First couple of things that come to mind, I don't want to pick them out and say that I know anything about them specifically, but think Planned Parenthood or Doctors Without Borders or any other group that you might imagine. If they're willing to, participate, they could get funding to do whatever the people who are distributing all this money want them to do. And so what we're looking at here, I started off, this discussion with erase everything you think you know about what the heck is going on here, because that's not what was happening and that's not what happened. So essentially, this is the settling of a trade dispute. And the way they settled it was not to say, okay, well, we'll make something and we'll promise to give it to you. They said, oh, no, let's get a big old pile of financing. Let's get everything we can possible into there. And if you want to participate, we'll help you build it out so you can feed yourself all these poisons and biological weapons. I see I've got 4 minutes, so I'm going to try to speed up here a little bit. That section, Article 44 BIS, very interestingly, in this document, their nomenclature normally is the amendments are in bold font, and the existing is supposed to be in regular font. Well, they kind of sort of forgot to put that whole section in bold. So I can cut somebody, anybody in the world, some slack if you picked up this document and you went looking and you were just looking for things that were bold. Well, that was not properly put into a bold font, easy to miss, as is the last paragraph on another new article, 54 BIS, which is the implementation committee. The thing that they didn't put in bold there is that the committee, this is the implementation committee, at their first meeting shall adopt terms of reference, which is basically their rules of operation, for the coordinating financial mechanism. So they're putting all this thing together, but they didn't define how that's going to work. There's no audit trail. There's no, where's the money coming from? How much money is there going to be? Where's it going to go? Who's going to get it? By what criteria do you dish out all the cash? Okay. This is a RICO racketeering criminal document contract, and I've dubbed it over the past couple of months. Maybe people have heard of OPEC, the oil producing and exporting countries. I call this the Organization of Pandemic Emergency Corporations. They want to be able to scare you with, oh, we found some bird flu or we found some swine flu or whatever, H5N1, H5N2, H5, whatever. But we've been busy making, all kinds of jabs and drugs and things, it's the Hegelian dialectic. You create a problem and you show up with the solution. And in this instance, they would get well paid, maybe even in advance, to have all of these products in the warehouse that the WHO wants to manage. So I'm pretty much right at the time I could talk for 10 more days, but this deal is a trade deal. It's not about what people think it is. Now, there are many other things, we're taking a limited amount of time and opening up for questions. There are aspects about international travel that are very important. But when I go out on the internet and I go looking for information about the WHO, this is going to shock you, okay? But the mainstream media is closer to the truth. They're not completely true, but they're closer to the truth. Primarily, I go to the WHO and I read their documents. And for everybody here, I hope nobody here takes any kind of sedative, because all you need is a paragraph or two of a WHO document and you're fast asleep. Get a couple of pages, you're good for a year. But in all seriousness, the horrific analysis and alternative media coverage of this, you've got people saying the treaty is dead. Well, they didn't pass the treaty, and there's a whole story behind the treaty. I haven't really talked about that. But they're going to continue the negotiations starting in July, and they've gotten a lot of the problems out of the way. Like I said, there's a story about that, and they hope to have it done by the end of the year. So if anybody is saying the treaty is dead, that's just fake news. And the amendments have passed. And since people were saying, everything under the sun was going to be in this agreement, and it turned out to be actually more than the nations originally asked for, unfortunately, I have to be honest, with all the effort I put in, it didn't have any impact whatsoever. This is an enormous defeat. But let me take a couple extra minutes and pull the silver lining out of these dark clouds. They wanted to push both of these things through without anybody seeing them, right? So all of this attention, all of this, looking at what they're doing, many people have paid attention. We know what's in the document, but they had to put half of their cards on the table. And the treaty, we've seen the development. So we now know their blueprint. And if anybody ever watched the original Star Wars, the culmination, I don't want to spoil it for anybody, but it's like, 40 years old. R2-D2 hooks into the computer system and downloads the schematics of the Death Star and gives them to Luke Skywalker. And Luke Skywalker understands what's going on, but he uses the connection to the great power of the universe, the Force, and drops a nice little explosive device down an air shaft to go to the core of the Death Star and blow it up. Okay, we've got the blueprints to what they want to do, which is essentially to make the pharmaceutical industry's products run like water, flow like water, or be like the air that you breathe. They want to manufacture gobs and gobs of all of these things that not only don't work, but they actually harm people. And I'm sure everybody here is all for that, right? Maybe not. So I'll leave it there. And if anybody's got questions, there's a lot more to the story, but let's have a little bit of back and forth here.
All right, thank you, James.
And
so the pandemic treaty is dead. Technically, it didn't pass in the session, but as you said, they're not giving up there. And then the international health regulations amendments that did go in place. So the ones that did go in place, James, what's different tomorrow that wasn't so a week ago?
The package of amendments were adopted. There is a 10 to 18 month period. The reason that is a range is because of fraud that was committed a couple of years ago that calls all of that into question. But there's a 10 to 18 month period where this is not going to be discussed or voted on by the Senate. Anybody who's been barking up that wrong tree just hasn't done their homework. It should be, but theory and what should be is totally different than what is. The Senate didn't say a word in 1969 when they created the IHRs. They didn't say anything in 2005. They didn't say anything in 2022 when they fraudulently did it, and they're not likely to say anything this time. And that's not how it works. It's assumed that since we sent, I think, 65 delegates to the World Health Assembly, and it was adopted by consensus, even though that's fraudulent, there's a whole story there. The way it works is that every nation has 10 to 18 months to send a letter to the WHO saying we reject these amendments. But that letter has to come from the head of state. And I'm not sure that the people who are moving Joe Biden's arm are going to have him sign this document, because they're the ones who wanted it to go through. They were the driving force in many ways in making this happen. And so the issue really comes down to, what are we even doing in an organization that behaves in this fashion, right? It's not the World Health Organization. There's a lot of other names for it. My latest favorite is the Worst Health Organization.
All right. So my first question is about the commercial aspects. I understood that it is a matter of trade and commerce that they're really trying to work through here. And I understood that the pharmaceutical companies, the ones that hold the patents and make the money off of these vaccines, are the ones who have a profit motive and don't want an equity. They don't want an equalization. And yet the United States government, who usually operates completely consistently with the pharmaceutical industry, who are now advocating for this trade equalization. How does that work exactly? Or did Big Pharma give up on their profit motive and they really just want to poison everybody?
Well, they certainly want to do the second part of that. Here's an extended version of the story. How many people got the memo on Friday, May 24th, not quite 2 weeks ago, that there was a treaty signing at the World Intellectual Property Organization, WIPO, across town in Geneva from the WHO. Well, one of the holdups, and you might use that, with sort of a dual meaning. One of the holdups in the negotiations at the WHO was exactly what you just said, intellectual property rights. Well, that goes both ways, because if you recall when South Africa and Botswana identified what they called Omicron, and they took their sovereign biological resource and they made it public, and then Pfizer and Moderna snagged it and turned it into the boosters, the South African government said, wait a minute, we gave you this incredibly valuable resource. This is corporate colonialism. You go back a couple of centuries or whatever, and the exploitation of forestry, timber products or gold mines or silver mines or oil and gas. They felt that they were being colonized and exploited for this very incredibly valuable genetic sequence. I mean, imagine how much money has been made based on a data file. Okay. And so this is an intellectual property argument that goes in both directions. If they don't want to give that sequence over to the pharmaceutical companies don't have anything to make. And vice versa, if the nations want to manufacture their own jabs, they need the manufacturing know-how and all of the well, the pharmaceutical companies don't want anybody really to know how they make their jabs. They don't really want that manufacturing know-how and intellectual property. They'll tell you a little tiny bit, but the secret sauce, that's like Coca-Cola. You don't know that they're putting, nanoparticles in it, right? And so when the WIPO treaty was signed on May 24th, the Friday before the assembly, what it said was that any of the signatory countries, if someone gets a patent, they have to identify the source of any genetic information. And that's kind of how they want to have sort of a track of, well, we gave you that information, so we want our royalties. You use that patent, we have sort of primary right, because you wouldn't have been able to do anything if we didn't give you the information. Well, that opened up the floodgates so that on Tuesday, the 28th, when the session opened and they were supposed to be talking about the amendments and the treaty, they said, hold on a minute. We might just be able to use that and renegotiate, continue these negotiations. So the WHO set up a secret drafting group, and they went into the middle of the night, 2, 3, 4 in the morning, all the way up till just a couple of hours before the witching hour of midnight on Saturday. And I think they did a lot of fraudulent things with their vote, but they presented it to the world as if it had been adopted. And so what we're dealing with here is an organization that, didn't follow their own rules. Article 55 says they were supposed to give us 4 months notice. They took a chapter out of the Federal Reserve Act, being passed in 1913, just before Christmas in the middle of the night with maybe a quorum, maybe not. Nancy Pelosi saying, oh, just vote for it. You can read it later with Obamacare. They didn't give us 4 weeks notice, 4 days notice. I don't even think they gave 4 hours notice. Here it is, boom, sign it. Or I should say, adopt it. And so the issue here is that almost everybody, it's like they walked out of a movie where there's a plot twist at the end. And, maybe The Sixth Sense, if anybody watched the movie, you watch the whole movie, there's a plot twist at the end, and then you go, oh, wait a minute, what the heck? I got to go watch it again. What just happened? The vast majority of people in the alternative media are celebrating a victory because most of the people in the WHO pushback have been putting out misinformation for months, making this be like, the most horrible thing in the world. Everything under the sun is going to be done to you. Tedros is going to take over the world. And I can't tell you how many people I've gotten phone calls from, and I've had to walk them back from the ledge. It's like, no, it's not. It's not going to have a digital ID. It's not going to be about climate change. It's not going to have, United Nations blue helmeted stormtroopers coming in, busting down your door. In short, all of the mandates and lockdowns and, masks and jabs and, your doctor can do this, that, or the other thing, that's all local. Your local tyrants didn't need any amendments or a treaty over the last 4.5 years to attempt to abuse you. And there's nothing in these documents, there hasn't been for well over a year, even a hint of any of that stuff. But that's what people have been saying. So that's what people believe. And if I could talk about the law in any very clear way, people have been going on hearsay. I'm old enough to have watched a good amount of Perry Mason. And I remember, I object, that's hearsay. And you have evidence, right? Well, here's the evidence. Okay, the document has been adopted. We can all read it. And then if you read what's in the document and then you listen to what you hear in the media, my God, the things I've heard, it's like, where do people, I mean, there are some creative people making up some creative stuff, and it's nowhere to be found in this document. Now, Chris Guy got a few things right and a few things unbelievably wrong. Philippe Cruza, who I sent messages to an hour before he said what he said, some of the things he said was right, some of them not so much. Now, events happened after he gave that speech, so that speech is old information. And so if you are a sports fan and you 6 months ago said that your favorite team was, they totally sucked, they're in last place, but they all of a sudden started winning and now they're in first place. And if somebody played a clip of what you said 6 months ago, well, 6 months ago, maybe it was true, but it's old. And so at the very least, if you're watching anything or reading anything that is prior to June 1st, throw it away. It's old news. Okay. And most of the stuff that's been published since Saturday night, it's just totally wrong. I don't know where they're getting all these ideas, but they're just making it up, putting it out. And it's a really interesting psyop because now is the time to be working harder. We've got their blueprint. We know what it is they're trying to do. They're trying to do it again with the treaty. And everybody's saying, oh, we win, praise us. We saved the world, donate, and go back to sleep. Well, we're going to be working on something else. So Ken's had his hand up for like an hour. We probably should honor his question here.
Go ahead, Ken.
There we go. Thank you for that. That's quite an interesting kind of breakdown of all the stuff going on with an organization that I, for the most part, avoid news about like the plague. And just kind of getting the summary of it. I mean, it sounds like, and Clint, I kind of like your synopsis of it kind of turning it more into a trade organization and adding what you were saying, James, very much based upon intellectual property. So they're looking at intellectual property as the fundamental asset, which that they would then roll out everything to all of the member and desiring countries. I guess the first thing I look at is how many other countries are really buying into their overall plan and agenda. And, is that making a dent in terms of getting other, let's say, health practitioners within those countries to say, hey, look, man, this is just a bad news no matter which way you go. And yes, we can understand that the state is kind of sponsoring that party line, but it's not going to be where we're going. Is there that type of conversation going on at all?
Not really, but that's not to say that there aren't people in, all around the world who are pushing back. The issue really starts with a fundamentally flawed premise. And I started off talking about, using a word that I don't like, normie, right? The vast majority of all of the people who are involved in these negotiations, because no one said a word about, well, wait a minute, masks don't work. Using the PCR as a diagnostic is fraudulent. Remdesivir, remdesivir, or midazolam, or all these other products, seriously, you want to inject a poison into your bloodstream, intravenously to protect you from a respiratory ailment? Um, who sold you on that one? And all of the jabs that have been taken off the market and clearly shown to not work, they don't stop infection, they don't stop transmission, they screw up your immune system, and people are getting disease, disability, and death in excess of anything that would have ever happened from something that really wasn't all that much statistically worse than a bad flu season. Why are they negotiating to redirect billions of dollars to manufacture these garbage products all around the world? Well, they apparently believe that system works. They're under the spell of pharmakia, that going to the doctor, getting a prescription, swallowing a poison, and when they scare you with the boogeyman that you don't have a disease, but there might be one out there, you should get a poison injected into your arm that goes into your bloodstream, can merge with any cell in your body and give instructions to that cell to make a protein that turns your immune system over to attacking you. That's a solution to a disease that you don't have. They believe this, and they're the ones pushing for it. They made it happen. And it's either unbelievable insanity or evil or both. And they have successfully captured the WHO, and not just the WHO, but all of the delegations of everyone around the country. That is the power of big pharma. WHO is the tail that's being wagged by big pharma, and that's all being funded by Mr. Global, a term put out by Catherine Austin Fitts. It doesn't make sense for people who are still able to think. But if you're greedy and confused and mix in a good amount of evil, it's very profitable. But
Well, I agree with that.
yeah,
That's obvious for the last 50 years.
yeah.
But I guess a lot of the premise of my point comes from is that over the last 3 or 4 years, we've seen this repeated failures from Klaus Schwab and the WEF and all these other world whatever foundations you want to call them,
Mhm.
and that there's just a substantial level of distrust underneath the um, like the platform of whatever the global media wants most of us to say.
Mhm.
And so maybe the WHO is kind of like the last domino, but I see most of these other dominoes falling. And a big evidence is look at the dollar. The dollar's tanking. You know, what's taking off? Well, BRICS is taking off. Why? Blockchain is taking off because people are coming up with other ideas. Now,
Mhm.
these are other ideas that are brilliant, and you're never going to be seeing them on the mainstream news because there's no profit to be made for them, not for them. But it still doesn't mean that they're creating an impact on those people that are willing to listen. And so I'm looking at that as saying that's a very positive thing and wondering if that's not also somehow carrying over into, what you're seeing as well.
Well, my optimism is that, while this is a absurd defeat, people celebrating our victory only to have obviously the WHO come out with this agreement. Um, I see this as a rallying point. You know, I encourage people to learn what this is. We just did this presentation. If you share this video with somebody, maybe they'll learn something. And when you go up to somebody and you ask them, do you think that the solution to the next pandemic is to have millions of dollars redirected through the WHO's financial mechanisms to have money come from wealthy nations, because poor nations don't have money, right? They would have done it all by themselves if they had it. Do you want poor nations to build out more mRNA manufacturing, more masks, more jabs, more tests? Do you think that is the solution? And if the person goes, oh, yeah, that's a great idea, you might want to walk away. Because if at this point in time they're still believing that, I don't know how to explain to them that I think that that is just absolutely the wrong direction, to put it nicely.
Sounds good.
Thanks so much, Ken. Yes.
Yeah, you said something about local tyrants and like maybe some areas or states would not, Louisiana, for instance. I mean, can that be their declaration to not go along with it? Can that be overturned in any way that you can see? But if I moved to Louisiana, or my state, South Carolina, wasn't adopting some of this or any of this, that would give me more freedom, more control over my life. So if you'll say more about that,
Let me invite Clint to chime in if you wish. This trade agreement, again, it's not what people think it is. And it's not an attack on sovereignty. There's nothing in here that is an attack on sovereignty. There's nothing in here that is putting the WHO, giving them power to tell your, doctor or your health department in wherever you may live what they have to do. That is all a figment of an imagination that has been spewed all over the internet for the last year. Okay, it's not those things. It actually, in my opinion, falls under Article 1, Section 8, Clause 3, the Commerce Clause, which when the states got together and created the Constitution and handed over 18 enumerated authorities to the federal government, the regulation of international trade was one of them. And so it fits within that constitutional framework because we're just doing trade with other nations. If our government wants to dump a bunch of money into building out infrastructure around the world, boy, we've never done that ever before. That's new. We do that with trillions of dollars over the years. The Louisiana legislation in specific, I tried to speak to one of the representatives there. I'd spoken to her 2 years ago when they passed a resolution. And I said, look, have you read the documents? Are you aware that this is not the WHO trying to come into Louisiana to make Louisiana do things? That this is a trade deal and that piece of legislation, while I appreciate the effort, and it's fine to say, stay out of here, all of the local officials pointing at the WHO saying bad, 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 had three fingers pointing back at them. And they should have said, hey, wait a minute, maybe we should be evaluating the emergency protocols and the medical board, abuse of doctors in Louisiana. Oh, but that's hard. It's real easy to write a paragraph saying, oh, bad, 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 WHO, WEF, and United Nations. But what about all of the laws on the books in Louisiana? Did they turn around and do the hard work of, editing and changing and repealing and rewriting those? That was a big old decoy. Oh, bad WHO. We don't want you to abuse the people in Louisiana. We want that all to ourselves.
Thank you, Julia.
uh-huh.
Yes, James talked about tapping into the force, and we're going to need some force going forward. Let's take a question from Brian. Thank you very much for raising your hand.
Hey, I'm sitting here in Yuba County, at the desk here, listening to you guys. Brother, what can I personally do to thwart this? What is your advice?
Step number one is to get clear on what the heck is really going on. Okay. Nobody who, I don't know how to say this other than just very, very bluntly. Okay. What has been happening for the last year is people have been running on hearsay. Somebody says something, they tell somebody who tells somebody, gets into the media, somebody shares it, it gets repeated. I got a video today that made me laugh. It's from a year ago, and it's just so unbelievably wrong. Okay. But it's going viral. And what we need to do is we need to dig down in and understand what the heck is going on here. Now, I've tried to make it as easy as possible. I get it, it's dense. I've done a lot of videos on my Substack. I think I did 10 interviews on Tuesday, and I think I did 6 yesterday, and I think I did 5 or so today. So there's all kinds of videos that you can watch, very similar to what we talked about today, but quite frankly, this one was condensed. There's a lot more crazy going on. Watch the videos. If there's one of them that you like, you think it's nice and complete and concise, or this video, share it so that other people get this cloudiness out of their mind. What's going on the internet right now from our side? Do you remember the old movie where a young woman was in a home? I think she was maybe babysitting, and she was getting these threatening phone calls, and the police traced the call, and they said, oh, it's coming from the building. It's coming from inside the house. Okay. Our problems are coming from within the movement. People are saying things that are inaccurate. That's inviting a clampdown on misinformation. Now, you should be able to make a mistake. You should be able to say something that's wrong, but then you should kind of sort of be shamed for it because you're wrong. But then you have the opportunity to be right. You shouldn't be censored, even if your opinion is off the wall based on, inaccurate information. You still should be able to speak. But what's going on is the people who are speaking are spreading misinformation. And so what I invite everybody to do is take the time to look at what this actually says. Do not take my word for it. Don't ever take anybody's word for it. That's hearsay. Look at the actual documents. If you've ever experienced something where you've been at the event or you're very, very, very knowledgeable about the topic and you read an article about it and you're like, what are they talking about? That's not what happened. Okay. That's my life every day. I go out on the internet and I go look at information and I'm like, how do you stop this insanity? It's all wrong. And then people get excited by it because it's sensationalized and they share the daylights out of it. And when you tell them, look, this is just corruption, this is a money deal, they're trying to build out big pharma. Okay, it's boring. And so the truth doesn't spread as quickly as sensational lies. And so what we need to do is get down to the facts and get very clear. And then whatever aspect of that you may find, share that as much as you possibly can. And then when you put the truth with documentation next to BS, okay, the truth generally does win, but a lot of people fall for the BS. Now, I learned a new phrase a couple of weeks ago. A friend taught me something. Has anybody ever heard of Gell-Mann amnesia? GELL-MANN amnesia. What it means is if you're reading a magazine or a newspaper or a blog or watching a news report and they report on something that you're very much certain that you know what the truth is and they're getting it wrong, and then you turn the page and you read the next article, that's some kind of amnesia. You should put the magazine down and go, wait a minute, they gave me wrong information. Why am I still reading? Why am I still following? Why am I still donating? Why am I still believing what they're telling me? Now, everybody can make a mistake, but at some point you got to look at it and you got to go, well, let me show them the right information. And if they continue to spread misinformation, you got to wonder, why am I allowing that into my mind? And so, we have a problem and it's coming from inside the building.
So basically then it comes down to it as it always is, we know what our Constitution says, it's self-governance. I have to self-govern.
Yeah.
So yeah, thank you very much.
Oh, no, absolutely.
Thank you, James, and thank you very much for your time and for setting us straight. I'm actually having to reevaluate, reorient myself because yeah, I'm prejudiced, I suppose, in thinking that the globalist sole objective is to take our sovereignty from us.
In many ways, we've already lost our sovereignty to big pharma. You know, the sovereignty loss is going to multinational corporations that have co-opted the FDA, the CDC, and you know, now the WHO. And so it does fit into that model of the world, but in the sense that they want to build out their industry around the world and co-opt the FDA in the, you know, in Africa and in every nation around the world by pushing their pharmaceutical answer. And you know, that's probably worse than some kind of legislative control. You know, that's messing with the minds and the bodies and the health of people around the world. You get people sick and you keep poisoning them, it's a lot easier to take control.
Very sobering. Thank you.
The good news is there is absolutely nothing in the amendments or the proposed pandemic treaty. The problems that people experienced over the last 4.5, 5 years, those are local issues, and your experience in that regard locally is still a problem. Okay, you know, whatever local tyrants might want to try to do, this isn't going to make that necessarily worse, except that, you know, if they believe that the WHO is this all-powerful, you know, health god, and the WHO has spoken, and they use that as a cover, it's not an order. The WHO isn't going to order anybody. They don't have any lawful authority, but they got a lot of good hypnosis and propaganda, and people believe. Okay, so educating people about, well, no, wait a minute, you don't have that authority. Who the heck are you? Right? I'm a man, I'm a woman, you're a man, you're a woman. Who gave you the authority? Did I sign some contract with you that said, you know, you can do this to me? I don't think so. Okay. The bad news is when you leave the United States and you travel internationally, which you may or may not plan on doing, but for those people who do, when you land in a different jurisdiction, this document, Article 31, says very clearly, because this is an agreement amongst nations, which is, you know, really an agreement amongst corporations. I get it, but it's the agreement that the person on the ground where you end up wholeheartedly believes. They have the authority under their rules to do whatever the heck they want. They can, the word they use is compel you to undergo a medical exam, prophylaxis, vaccination, whatever vaccines are these days, or be isolated and quarantined. And I know people personally who they've traveled and, you know, boom, in quarantine they went. Other people who got off of a plane, went through customs, did not have the paperwork that they said was needed. They found themselves in a little room with a health person with a syringe and an alcohol swab looking for an arm to stick a needle in. And they stood their ground. And, you know, that training of how do you stand your ground is vital. But I know other people who were traveling and or planning on traveling, so they got the shots that they were told they had to have, wrecked their health, and now they're actually very prominent people in the health freedom movement. So this document is where the form for this vaccine passport can be found. This is in Annex 6 of the International Health Regulations. And they made adjustments to that to strengthen the ability of the foreign nation to which you are traveling to express their national sovereignty and use it to bludgeon the rights and freedoms and bodily autonomy of each individual international traveler. So this document is a problem. It needs to go. And so does the WHO. I encourage people to go to exitthewho.com because, you know, when a relationship has gone this sour, you need to break away and say sayonara. And you know, ultimately the answer is have everybody leave this organization and watch it crumble. It really just comes down to a very simple thing. so many people accept hearsay. Somebody said something, therefore they repeat it and it gets repeated. And at some point you go, where in the heck did that start? How did that come to be? I sometimes I think the gods are putting on a theatrical production for my entertainment, because this is ridiculous. Who needs Netflix? I've been watching As the WHO Turns for the last 2 years. It's way more, interesting, because everybody's involved, right? And everybody's playing a role. And it's like, who's writing the lines for this script that, if you put this to a Hollywood producer, you would not get a green light, because this is too crazy. Okay. However you can, whatever you come across, ask yourself, are they triggering fear? Are they offering me a solution? And are they offering evidence, right? If somebody comes up and says, oh, we did a FOIA request and the government provided us with one of Fauci's emails. Look what he said, right? Or there's an audio recording and it's verified, it's him speaking, saying, oh, we're going to make your life miserable if you don't get jabbed. Sounds like acceptable evidence. Should be enough to, convict somebody of a crime. But then you got to look to the law and go, oh, the law is corrupt too. There's no punishment for that. Oh, darn. They've corrupted the law too. Be very discerning with whatever it is that you read and watch. Just because somebody said it, just because I said it, you know, go into that source and see if they have a deeper source, an initial document or something. And the problem is, it takes time, it's effort, it's hard. And so the lies spread faster than the truth.
Thanks for that call to action, the call to a sober call to action to inform ourselves and make sure the information sources that we're relying on have their sources themselves and that you verify them. That's, I guess, the responsibility of all of us all the time. And we like to shortcut. And guess what, James? You're my favorite shortcut. So,
well,
really...
I appreciate the trust, but I always provide the goods. I don't say something unless I got the evidence behind it. It makes life easy. It's just like, hey, it's right there. I'm just reading. I got the document right here. I'm just reading what they're telling you. It's too hard to remember stuff if you're lying. So.
All right, everyone, get in touch with James if you have more questions and do our homework. All right, so with that, I wish you all the best. Thank you very much again, James, and what great questions too to drive the conversation forward. And we'll be together again soon. Go on to YouTube and Rumble and subscribe to our channels there so that you can see all of our videos. And if you subscribe and set your notifications, you can be alerted when new recordings are uploaded. So blessings to everyone. I really do love the spending time with such freedom-loving people, all of you.
Have a good one. Bye-bye.
Bye, everyone.